Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros podcast. You are joined by myself, Ilan, and by my lovely friend, co-host and comrade, Jeremy Tussia. How are we, mate?
Good, mate. Thanks for the very enthusiastic intro. That was lovely. I'm well. I've had a nice week. I've had a very good week surrounded by close friends. You know, we've ventured out on a lot of beach walks, had some great weather in Melbourne, so took advantage of that and got out and about, got some vitamin D, so feel that summer breeze coming in. And yeah, I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, I can't complain. I was going to ask, how's your sleep going? Because last week you were, getting below 6 hours of sleep, and that's not very good for the human body now, is it?
Yeah, last week was terrible for sleep, but this week was a lot better. I did get a hold of that, so I put my fears of regret into action and I acted upon my what was inactions. So that was great and feeling a lot better for it. So yeah, had a pretty productive week. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So today we're going to be speaking about social anxiety, and it's a very interesting topic, very prominent, especially when we're quite young, but it can be kind of pervasive, especially when it develops into a more of a disorder. So Jeremy, can you describe what, broadly speaking, social anxiety is?
Yeah, well, the way I think about social anxiety is just the overall fear of situations that we might find ourselves in where we're fearful of being scrutinized, fearful of being evaluated, judged by others. It's those butterflies in your stomach when you walk into a party or into a crowd of people that, you might know, but you don't know too well. They're not your closest friends. They're not your immediate circle of people that you would normally hang out in. And you just have that lingering fear in your stomach of, what are they going to think of me? And I think this is really good to speak about now, and why we wanted to record this episode now, going into summer. Essentially, summer is a time where social events really kick off.
It's wedding season, apparently.
Wedding season?
Yeah, apparently people get married during November and December because of the weather.
Well, mate, I'm 23 years old, so I've got a little while to wait before then. But
I just heard it's wedding season.
You've heard it's wedding season. Well, I've heard it's festival season, mate. So that's what I'm hearing. That's what's in the water that I'm
any festivals?
Well, yeah, we've got a few lined up, so that'll be good fun. But social anxiety is very much a thing when we get to these social events and these festivals. So something that I've felt, it's probably something that you felt, and it's certainly something that a lot of people feel. So let's dive into it, and yeah, let's run through some examples that people might be able to think about when we typically think of social anxiety. I've mentioned parties and being around crowds of people you're not normally used to, but there's a plethora of others, aren't there?
I mean, it's as simple as going into your university shoot and thinking, wow, I don't want people to judge how I look. It's a job interview where you go in and you think, geez, I might not only even get the job, but they might think of me in an unfavourable way. It's dates. It's going on a first date and thinking the worst thing that could happen. I mean, on my first date with my partner now, I was so nervous. I went to the bathroom 3 times to, just
to squeeze the lemon.
What does that mean? Urinate?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can't understand you and your lingo. I was a bit nervous, right? But these are all kind of normal feelings. And again, we always speak about evolutionary psychology on the Big Bros podcast.
Go on, self-proclaimed evolutionary psych.
No, I'm not.
Take it away.
No, I'm not. You're the one proclaiming me. But truthfully, the thing about why we feel social anxiety is because I think back in our ancestral days, we did not want to be ostracized from our group because our group was our means of survival. It's how we accumulated resources. It's how we accumulated things like food, medicine, things like water. And if we had our own group ostracizing us and negatively evaluating us, that could have been a predictor of them excommunicating us, of even banishing us. And in those times, that would have meant certain death. You would have had no protection. And we know the power of community. So I think that's something that's kind of been just drilled into the very deep reptilian parts of our brain. So these are all very, very normal symptoms. But I want to say and preface this one thing is that it's very normal to feel nervous in social situations. And just because you feel nervous doesn't mean you have social anxiety disorder. And I think it's really important that we actually outline where it might be necessary to go seek professional help. Because again, Jeremy and myself, as much as we love having a yarn about these topics, we're not professionals. We aren't giving you any qualified advice. But what we can do is kind of illuminate some things that might be worth having a chat about. And in the case where it does become quite pervasive, it's as simple as knowing, does it affect your day-to-day? Are you purely not going out anywhere? Are you isolating yourself at home? Is it restricting and damaging the relationships you have with your own loved ones? Is it stopping you from progressing in your life? Are you not being able to generate an income because you're too afraid to go to work? That's the key word there, is functionality. And I really want to preface that and highlight that when it does get to that point, we would genuinely encourage anyone who feels like this to get some form of professional advice.
I like that you brought in those examples, and when you were running through them just then, it reminded me when we recorded our episode on burnout, and I was thinking those examples seem quite similar to the examples that we were mentioning when we were speaking about burnout. It was the loss of character, it was the tendency to start impacting your other relationships negatively, to lose insight into your hobbies, your loves, your desires, and essentially just lose a bit of yourself and your personality. So it's interesting to see how it all interrelates, but it's also important to preface, like you said, that just because you're nervous in situations, just because you have butterflies in your stomach, don't just, throw the word socially anxious around, because like we've just discovered there, it's a lot more in depth than that. When I think of, times where I've been maybe a little bit socially anxious, I don't have social anxiety, but a little bit socially anxious at times, those butterflies, those nervousness, that's simply all it is. It's just the butterflies. It's the feelings of the unknown. It's not like I felt like I was losing my character and I wasn't able to be myself anymore, and I was impacting my friends around me. It was just simply feelings of nervousness. You're entering something new, you're entering something a little bit unknown. And I think those feelings can also be often mistaken for something that actually just might be excitement, because the feeling of anxiousness and excitement has been proven to go hand in hand and can be often linked.
Anxiety and excitement.
Well, the feelings...
It's true.
The feelings of like the anxious butterflies that we might feel, and that
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Like in our gut, can also just be excitement at times, but they present very differently too. So that's the difference, that how they present is different.
It's true. I'm really glad you brought that up. First thing I wanted to say is not everything has to be pathologized. I think we say it with even things like depression, anxiety. These are some really severe clinical disorders when it really disrupts your functioning. But at the same time, think with psychology and like the phenomenons in psychology, it's really hard to pinpoint usually at what point it's a disorder and at what point are they just normal symptoms that can affect you. And it's not like things in medicine where you can do a blood test on someone and have a clear biomarker and which says definitively yes or no, this person has X or Y disease, correct?
Yeah.
With psychology, it's a bit more spectrumy. On one end, it might not be disturbing your functionality, but on the very extreme end of it, it might be. And in those cases, that's where it might be worth going to a psychologist, to a psychiatrist, to get some sort of medical and professional advice, because first of all, that can give you a lot of, relief, because for a lot of people, they might not know that they're living with something that is a disorder, and they might just try to tough it out. And truthfully speaking, sometimes getting that professional help is really important. Second point I wanted to make was about the whole excitement and anxiety bit. There's going to be times in life, even when you go on a big travel adventure, I don't know if you're the same, the night before I always get like this anxiety.
Can't sleep the night before.
But it's excitement, and
it's the butterflies. It's exactly that same feeling. It's the butterflies in the stomach, but in that circumstance, I'm not anxious. I'm not experiencing anxious butterflies and nervous butterflies. I'm experiencing excitement.
And why do you think that is? Because in the back of your head, you're thinking this is an exciting thing. Therefore, because I'll tell you why. When we think of anxiety, we always frame it in a negative way. So anxiety has to be associated with a negative event. When we look at things like traveling, adventure, we see it as coolness, as something positive. So then, therefore, we're more likely to label it as a positive thing. Therefore, excitement.
Yeah.
And it's funny, if you've got a job interview coming up where it might have more of a neutral connotation, instead of saying I'm feeling anxious, just a bit of an experiment. Tell yourself, nah, I'm not anxious. I'm actually excited, and see what happens then to your overall mood and effect.
Yeah, I like that. It's a nice perspective. But tell me, why is it a thing? Why is social anxiety a thing? And who can it impact? Because I feel like, there's a tendency that it might impact some more than others based on, I guess, their nature versus nurture argument, who they've been around in the past, maybe their upbringing. Talk to me through that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that can impact one's feelings of social anxiety symptoms, but I think just having low self-esteem doesn't really do one any favors. If you've got a very unfavorable view of yourself, if you're placed in situations where you might be evaluated by others, people can kind of catch on to that. It's a bit of a contagion. If you've got low confidence and you give off these subtle micro signs that you are a person who doesn't have a high self-worth or feelings of high self-worth, people can pick up on those things, and it can kind of perpetuate that cycle. As an example, I was listening to the Stephen Bartlett podcast, Diary of a CEO. Excellent podcast. Strongly recommend that our listeners give it a listen when they can. And he had a therapist on called Marissa Peer. And she said that a lot of times when she's seeing clients, there's usually 3 things she can identify that have a link to what they're presenting with. So for example, if they're coming in with some sort of depression, anxiety, phobia even, there are 3 things, or even addiction, there are 3 things that can usually be tied into that. The first one is feelings of difference. So if one is feeling like they're a different person and they can't connect to people, that's going to impact their fear of being socially evaluated by others, because there's nothing worse than being at a dinner party situation. And let's give it an example. Say everyone's talking about politics and you know that you're not really interested in the political situation in North Korea and you don't really read up on those sort of things. It's just not your taste, and that's fair. But they ask you, what's your thoughts on what's happening in Syria, North Korea, about, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And you might not have anything to say, and you might feel, wow, like I can't connect with these people. I feel different to them. And then the next thought that arises is, do they think I'm dumb? Am I being negatively evaluated by them? Are they going to want to invite me over again for this dinner? The second thing is, and that Marissa Peer speaks about, is that another time people come in and they've got some sort of presentation, is that they feel feelings of wanting something but not being able to achieve it. I'll be honest, I can't really find a direct link between that and maybe social anxiety, but she did mention one other thing, and it's feelings of not being enough. And that ties directly into self-esteem. And I feel that, reason 1 and 3 being feelings of difference and feelings of not being enough go hand in hand in this. Because again, it's a contagion. If you don't have high self-esteem, if you feel like you can't connect with others, you're going to have consistent thoughts in your mind about, well, I can't really relate to other people. Are they going to think negatively of me?
Yeah, exactly right. I think what was running through my mind then is something that I heard recently, it was on a TikTok video or something, which was a great piece of advice where, often when you go on a first date, right, or it's early in your dating with whoever you're dating, you're nervous, you're excited, but you're nervous. You've got those butterflies like you mentioned before on your first date when you were reflecting on that with your now partner.
And squeezing the lemon.
And you're squeezing the lemon. But yeah, those first dates, it's a time where you're nervous, it's new, it's a situation you might not have been in before. This person might be completely new to you. You might not have never met them, and you're freaking out. You're scared, A great piece of advice that I heard for being in that situation is to just admit it. Like actually just tell them that you're feeling nervous, that you're feeling a little bit awkward maybe. And funnily enough, the responses that, they spoke about in this video were all positive, where the person that actually was the one to admit that they were feeling a little bit nervous, a little bit awkward at times, they were more, like those responses were more reciprocated by the person that they were on the date with, because then they felt like they could be honest with how they were feeling too, because they were also feeling a little bit nervous.
And guess what that creates?
Well, it creates bond between them. It creates connection. And that's exactly what you're looking for on a first date, right? You're looking for that connection. And it just shows that being honest is the best tool. Honesty is the best policy. And there's no shame in feeling a little bit socially anxious at times, a little bit nervous, a little bit awkward. We're all human. We all feel that way. None of us are just built like Thor and can walk into a room and just have contagious confidence just oozing out of us. That's the dream, right? But we're human and we've all got our imperfections, and we shouldn't be striving for perfection in situations like this, because then there wouldn't be much of a challenge anyway. So I think it's just, there's some beauty in just admitting to it actually, and admitting to your feelings, and that'll actually bring a lot of connection through the people that you're interacting with.
You know what I fucking love? Authenticity. And what you just described there is a great example to show one's authenticity. I mean, you go on first dates, you go on any social interaction, you're going to be trying to present the most robust, strong, favourable view of yourself. And that might mean minimizing any sort of vulnerabilities or defects you have about your personality. And truthfully speaking, you get to know someone for a while, and you can see that you'll get to learn about those vulnerabilities. But if a person outwardly just communicates things that they feel vulnerable about, I mean, that shows authenticity. It shows trust. It shows that, if that person's able to communicate what they're nervous about, anxious about, you have more respect for them, because that's also tough. You're showing to that person, hey, I'm not afraid to vocalize my vulnerabilities and be authentic in this situation, despite the prospect that you might judge me unfavorably for it.
Yeah. I think there is it is a balance, just like anything though. You don't want to sit across the table from someone and just hear them constantly harp on about how nervous they are with you, because there is a limit. If you're hearing a lot of that, it might make you feel a little bit shameful in a way, and maybe a bit nervous to interact.
I'll give you an example of a good balance.
Yeah, prefacing it is healthy.
It's like, let's say you and I are on a first date and we're getting some drinks, and you're getting a vodka gin and tonic because that's what you like, right?
Hate it, but
not
anyway.
Not vodka G&T. You're just getting I don't know.
That's the one drink I cannot.
Yeah, I know. Why do you think I
G&T.
said it? Yeah. And, so I'm really excited. Like, I'm very happy to be here. I'm not going to lie. I'm a bit of a shy person. I can get a bit nervous at times. I think that's like a good line to say, because you're
Absolutely.
not, you're showing confidence and you're happy that you're there, but you're not being like, I'll be honest, I can't do this date. I got to run. I'm sweating bullets here.
Yeah.
And that's completely different. So I agree. There is definitely a great art to it.
Absolutely. And look, a lot of us might have tendencies to be a little bit more nervous and perhaps socially anxious than others. And, if that's you, there are tools you can put in place to get over that. And what I like to think about is recognizing your triggers. What are the things that that might actually be causing you a little bit of anxiety in going into that situation? And if those are things like, maybe it's paying for the bill, or working out who's paying for the bill. Maybe it's deciding on drinks or what you're going to be eating and ordering off the menu. If you know those are little examples that make you feel nervous on that first date, as an example, you're already one step ahead, because you've recognized that trigger. And before you go on that first date, you can then put in the steps in place to actually get over that for when you cross that bridge. So, if you know that paying for the bill is something that you're worried about, discuss that with the person that you're on the date with. Make it your effort to discuss that, or just be forthcoming and pay it yourself if that's something you're comfortable to do. Or if it's ordering the drinks or ordering food, whatever it might be, maybe say on the date, like, so keen to get involved and have a chat further with you, but let's just go head down, bum up for a moment and suss out what we want to drink and what we want to eat, and then let's continue. And I think those are some nice little tips, at least that I've taken on board for myself, and has allowed me to navigate those circumstances. But I also think, like, if you're naturally a perfectionist, right? Perfectionism, look, we all strive to be the best version of ourselves in some way, shape, or form. But I think, being a perfectionist, you might have the tendency to be a little bit more hyper fixated on, the way you present yourself or the way in which your personality is perceived by other people. And I think comfort is in knowing that people honestly do not give a shit. Like, I think to myself, so what? Like, if there is ever a situation where I'm feeling socially anxious or nervous and I'm scared of maybe being judged or evaluated or what people are thinking of me, I think to myself, like, so what? Like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? And it's funny how like that little affirmation can actually give you that sense of comfort, because I'm a true believer that no one is actually going to think about you more than what you think about yourself. And yeah, we all think about people from time to time, but it's fleeting, whereas when we think about ourselves, we can be in our minds for that longer period of time, and we can eat ourselves up over it. So just really think to yourself, like, you're that small, essentially. Like, we're all just a bunch of individuals in a room at a party, whatever it might be, and all the thoughts that we might have about one another, it's fleeting.
I mean, that's the spotlight effect for you, right? It's a very, very huge thing. And again, I think we spoke about in previous episodes, the spotlight effect rears its ugly head, especially when we're younger. And we just, with age, we start to give a shit less, I think, naturally. But I think when we're younger, we tend to have that fixation that the world revolves around us, when we're babies especially, taking it back, you don't have any conscious awareness of how other people feel. And I think throughout time, throughout maturity, you do go on to develop less, maybe more cynicism, but really it's just this sense of not giving a shit about what other people think. So I think it's also something that coincides with age. Social anxiety, it might kind of, minimize with age. Tell me about the cycle of avoidance in social anxiety.
The cycle of avoidance in social anxiety. Well, that's a big sentence you're hitting me with there, mate.
Good.
What do you mean by that? Just break that down for me
All
first.
right. Okay. So in any sort of symptom,
there
are things we can do to prolong it and continue it. So, you know what? How about I explain it? Would you like that? Okay. If I'm consistently fearful of going out because I'm afraid that people are going to negatively evaluate me, I might put situations in place where I actively avoid it. For example, let's say I really don't want to go to the grocery store because I'm afraid what people might think of how I look or how I dress.
Right.
I might instead order in Uber Eats. I might get, Uber Eats groceries, whatever. And whilst that might be convenient at the time because I don't have to face the discomfort of facing my anxieties of going out, what I'm really doing there is strengthening the association between avoidance and fear. The more I avoid, the more I'm going to fear. And almost like an addiction, you create these myelin sheaths in your brain that, as you would learn in physiotherapy anatomy, it's the electrical wiring of your brain's association networks. And the more we associate avoidance patterns, and we continually decide to avoid these situations, we're less likely to confront them in the future. That's why the longer you're addicted to something, the harder it is to break it.
I like it. I think you explained that very eloquently, much better than what I could have. But yeah, it's. I think that's true, and I think it's a prime example of, once you recognize that trigger, nip it in the bud right then and then, so that you don't have that intense fear lingering and snowballing for next time when that opportunity presents itself, because it's going to come around again. You're not going to be able to get rid of it if you don't attack it at one point in time, right? So you may as well just do it then. And again, what's the worst that can happen? Either you actually get through it and you nip it in the bud, or you might screw up, but that's all right because you'll learn from it and that won't happen again, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
And if it does, you try again.
You try again. I think persistence is a massive thing. Yeah. I mean, when we were looking at this topic, I wanted to figure out, why is it that some people tend to develop more pervasive symptoms of social anxiety disorder than others? And there's a big thing with childhood, especially your attachment to your earliest caregivers.
Yeah.
And it might sound a little bit abstract for the moment, but truthfully speaking, if you're not feeling like a self-sufficient person and you rely upon other people, you're more likely to be more reliant on other people's positive appraisals, but also you're more sensitive to negative appraisals. So to give you an example, If a child is not shown or reciprocated any sort of love and affection in their earliest years,
Yeah.
they tend to become over-reliant on getting approval from other people. And you become, validation. Yeah, great term. Yeah. And you tend to pedestalize that approval from other people. And that's really, really important. It creates a sense of dependence on other people. And as an example, we might become less confident in our own feelings of self-sufficiency. And what ends up happening there is when we have a lack of self-sufficiency, low sense of self, we tend to cling onto people in relationships. We might become too much. Same with intimate relationships. We may become really clingy partners. And suppose there's a situation where you're a bit older, you had some insecure attachment, and your partner breaks up with you. And you're forced to be in a position where you need to operate this big, scary world on your own. And you have these low feelings of self-worth and self-sufficiency. You become even more nervous about going out into the public space for fear of negative self-evaluation. And I know it's a bit of like a niche risk factor, but it's actually really true, because attachment and insecure attachment, you see it linger its ugly head in cases where, like for example, it rears its ugly head, especially when it comes to the topic of social anxiety, because you're not confident in yourself. So yeah, that was something I found quite interesting.
No, I think that is interesting. And look, I think it's also important to recognize that it's not your fault if these are the cards that you've been dealt, essentially. Like if you do feel like there might be some level of childhood trauma or past relationship trauma there, it's not your fault that that's happened to you, and that's the cards that you've been dealt. But if you're at the age if you're in your 20s now, or if you're in your late teens, and you start to feel like there's patterns that are reoccurring in your behavior and the way in which, you might be seeking validation from others constantly or regularly, and even just the ways in which you might be presenting yourself in social circumstances or disassociating from social circumstances because you're fearful of that. If this is becoming a common thing and you're actually noticing that in yourself, firstly, I think that's incredible that you're able to have that like self-awareness. So tick for having that self-awareness first and recognizing that there is a common pattern here, and then taking the steps in place is the next step. Working out what are those triggers, like we mentioned before, and working out how to actualize that. And look, there are definitely things that you might be able to do, like the little minor things which we spoke about in terms of navigating, like tips for when you're on a date or when you're going to a party, whatever it might be. But if there's like bigger things, bigger deep rooted like anxiety type things, it's like you should never feel shameful for seeking like professional help from that either. And like I can't stress that enough. Like I think therapy and all of that, it does have its like stigma at times, but it's something that essentially everyone should have at least, I think, once in their lifetime, to just hear the perspectives of someone else, someone that doesn't know them personally, and help them through stuff. It's extremely gratifying and extremely beneficial.
I mean, we all have blind spots as humans, right? Yeah. Psychologists will go see their own psych sometimes, because at the end of the day, in a war between logic and emotion wins, and emotions can blind us. And we're all humans. Humans, before they become psychologists, are going to have their shortcomings. They won't be able to recognize certain things. That's why going to a psych might be really helpful, because that therapist can at least look at your situation through an objective lens of stripping away all the emotions. And I think I'm really glad you mentioned awareness, because we're going to go through some kind of strategies that have kind of been validated, in the scientific world about things that can help. But truthfully speaking, awareness is the big thing.
Yeah.
I know, like, if you've had a negative experience, let's say you were a very shy, not a shy, but you were rather really bubbly kid. You loved, being in social situations when you were younger. And, the classic example of the boy who pisses their pants in year 2. That wasn't me, by the way. I know. I was just thinking the way I'm just explaining this, it may sound like I'm alluding to something like that of happening to me, but luckily it did not. I'm sure I had more embarrassing moments that I probably blocked out of my mind, but that's probably a good example. Yeah, I mean, we laugh now, but truthfully, that's a really traumatic experience for a child. That can really turn their personality from someone who was quite bubbly and happy to someone who's really
course.
fearful, shy, timid, low sense of self-esteem, constantly hyper-fixated of what people are going to think of them. That shit can really carry on into adulthood. And I think
Yeah.
that could be quite an obvious example, but sometimes it might not be. Like the whole thing we mentioned before about insecure attachment and how that can manifest in affecting someone's, feelings of social anxiety when they're older. That's also really crucial to be aware of. But I think awareness is great, and it's the first prerequisite step, because after that, I do think actions speak most loudly.
Yeah.
And I think techniques such as graded exposure is quite important as well.
Yeah. And I love that, because you're going to have to put in the steps in place to actually actualize what you might need to do, right? And I think graded exposure is one of those excellent tools that we can instill when we're feeling anxious or nervous or whatever it might be, is just throw yourself in there. Just put yourself, if it's putting yourself in the deep end, do it. And it might be so fearful, but like you said before, it's that graded exposure where if you don't do it, it might just reoccur again. And then you're going to have that situation present itself again, and you're going to be at that crossroad where you might have to do that again and actually throw yourself in. But, if you don't do it, then you might actually get even more down on yourself, because you're going to think, far out, well, like, this situation has presented again, and like, I've strayed away from it when I should have thrown myself into it. So
and you continue that cycle we spoke about earlier, the avoidance.
It's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle. So I think just throwing yourself in there, as tough as it might be, can absolutely bring you wonders, especially if it's an example like a party, for example, where you're surrounded by hopefully friends around you too, and you've got the comfort that there are people that you can confide in. If things don't go to plan, there are people there that can give you the support as well. But, I think even if it's examples where you're on your own, like you're going to have to be on your own eventually, you're all like, we're not going to be around people all the time. So throw yourself in, and either you're going to sink or swim, but it's not going to be sinking to the bottom of the ocean. You're going to be able to keep swimming eventually, and you're going to be able to like actually put in the steps in place. If things don't go the way you plan, you'll work them out so that you can actually get better the next time.
Fair. I mean, the whole thing with graded exposure, it's that it's gradual. I mean, you want to be careful with someone who's quite sensitive to these things. Like, I'll give you an example. Someone who's got a really bad phobia of cockroaches, spiders, like myself. I hate cockroaches.
Yeah.
I hate spiders.
I hate spiders
if I
too.
wanted to get to the point where I could be a contestant on Fear Factor,
Yeah.
and I went to a therapist and said, all right, let's do some graded exposure. It may start off with
one. Yeah, it'll start off with like
no,
one
it'll
cockroach,
really
or maybe.
it'll literally. I'll tell you what. It would start off as simple as this. Even talking about it.
Yeah.
Then it might be the next session looking at a photo of a cockroach or a spider. The next session after that, it might be having a cockroach or a spider in a little cage.
Yeah.
The next session could be then coming a bit closer to the caged cockroach.
Yeah, exactly.
And eventually you do all these little steps to increase your confidence and your comfortability with it. And in turn, you might even, get you so comfortable you can even hold that cockroach or spider, albeit I do not ever want to go through that process. But even in the social anxiety kind of context, I saw something quite interesting once. There was a Reddit thread about a person who wanted to go and order some Subway, and they had really severe and debilitating symptoms of social anxiety. And they asked, like, what's the process, when I go into Subway? And the Reddit commenter said, okay, this is steps 1 to 20 of what you do. You pick your bread, you pick your meat, your veggies, whatever. And the guy did that. And first of all, when I read that was like, I almost shed a tear, because that's like, humans can be a very aggressive bunch. And I think that's like a really cute sign of, times where people can be quite supportive to one another. But you could interpret that as almost being graded exposure itself, because at the end of the day, next time they might not require a whole list. They might not be guided through it because they've already exposed themselves. But I completely agree. You have to break that vicious cycle at one point.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad you clarified that, because me sitting here and just saying, just throw yourself in and, you'll either sink or swim, can be a very perceived as a very black and white response, but
you're not wrong. Like, there are people that would benefit from that. I'm very much someone who, let's just forget spiders and stuff,
but just likes to go step by step.
I don't like to go step by step. Like, I'm very much the person that loves to go straight into the deep end because I find that with me, I operate better. But I mean, everyone's different, so you'd find what works for you.
You find what works for you. But, I think even if you do go step by step in graded exposure, whatever it might be, starting with a smaller party, then getting to a bigger party, that is still, in my mind, that's still massive improvement, and that is still throwing yourself in the deep end. So it's how you perceive the situation. Another way, I think, in terms of combating it, is to try be as confident as you can in a scenario where you feel as confident as you can be first. And what I mean by that is, confidence is a really transitional thing. You can be really confident in playing football, but you might not be confident at all in playing soccer, right? So if you're able to really find that hobby, that space, that environment, those people that make you feel your most confident self, get yourself there. Get yourself there. Start in that area. Surround yourself by those people. Do that thing that what makes you feel your best self, and that can hopefully give you the confidence to transfer into something maybe a little bit different, but still a little bit similar eventually. And you can apply that to a first. We've been talking about first dates, so let's keep talking about first dates. You can apply that to a first date scenario where, you might be really nervous to meet this person. Maybe you've known them, maybe you don't know them at all, but you know that there's that one place, that one bar, that one park that you feel really confident in being at. Maybe it's close to home. Maybe it's just a walk away. Maybe you've grown up around there, and it's just something that is comfortable for you. A step you can take is by actually organizing to, be at that place, because that's already one tick. That's one box that you've ticked where you're combating that feeling of nervousness, that feeling of anxiety. You're already putting in a step in place to make sure that you're confident in at least one domain, and then you can just worry about the next one. But at least surrounding yourself first in areas that are, comfortable to you and feel at home to you in a way. And then you'll allow yourself to break down the barriers of what might be a little bit grander or a little bit more different for you eventually.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's also something to be said about actually just improving your self-esteem and, doing things that improve one's self-love. We've preached on about it, especially on many episodes here, the importance of doing things we don't like, but things that are necessary for us.
Yeah.
Because it builds trust with ourselves, and it also cultivates love and self-confidence and value. And the thing is, what does that do? In a social situation, say, you're someone who's gotten really fit and athletic at the gym, because it's a great sort of thing. You become so, I don't want to say in love with yourself, because it almost sounds narcissistic, but you become so confident in yourself that in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, you know what? I've proven to myself why I have such respect for myself. I'm sure people will feel the same way. And confidence is contagious. But I just want to touch on this one little thing. Marissa Peer, this the guest therapist that was on the Diary of the CEO, she said something really, really interesting, which is, we always talk about here that, shouting affirmations in the mirror is not going to help. It's actions. But she said something quite interesting, and I think there's a time and place for this. She says, we have to cheat, we have to lie, and we have to cheat and lie to our brain. Sorry. Mm-hmm. And the reason she mentions that is because our brains and our mindsets are going to paint a picture of scenarios that may not happen. They might be, our brains love to paint a really bleak picture of what might happen. And what do we do when our brain paints that picture? We find evidence. We're like, oh shit, well, yeah, I remember that one time I did this and that and I felt so shit. But she says do something different. Say you are going on that first date and you're having all these thoughts and anxieties of, this person's not going to like me. They're going to think I'm a loser. I haven't found a full-time job yet. I'm broke, X, Y, and Z. Instead, and then what's funny? The way you're thinking and feeling, you're already providing evidence for that. I'm broke. I haven't found a full-time job. Instead, you say, I'm really excited for this day. I think they're going to love me. And it might sound a bit overconfident, but you know what? Fuck it. What's the worst that can happen? Your brain will start literally finding evidence of why that may be the case. Okay, if I tell myself I love it, so they're going to love me, like I have so much, warmth, so much care, you start thinking about times in your own life, like, for example, I'm a really passionate person. They're going to love that. When was the time I was passionate? Oh, last week when I was, writing a song because I want to be an aspiring musician. You're going to find evidence of your brain finds evidence of things that you think and feel, because that's just how we operate. It's our recency bias that comes into it. So I think that's also really, really important. But
lovely point. And yeah, I think that's just a fleshed out way to have those positive affirmations of yourself. You said, like, essentially the brain is going to only tell us what it's used to experiencing. And sometimes for us to get over that is to get under it by going against the grain and by doing things that might feel a little bit out of the ordinary for us. But if we do it enough, we're going to believe it.
I love it. And you know what? Confidence is contagious. I know that, at the end of the day, we should be more concerned about how we feel about ourselves. But knowing that if you're confident and people can really recognize that, I think that can go a long way in diffusing some of those symptoms of social anxiety symptoms.
Absolutely. On that note, mate, I think we'll wrap it up there. So happy Tuesday, everyone. Hopefully you've taken something away from this, even if it was just one lesson that we mentioned or one little nugget that applies to your life. We hope that, you can put that into practice and it can make a difference for you leading into the summer with all these social events coming up. If you do feel like you've taken a little bit away from it, and there are people that might also really enjoy listening to this episode and it can hopefully help them, it'd be absolutely amazing if you could share it with them and help them grow so we can all grow together. And it really does help our show grow as well.
And if you guys are loving this podcast, you're listening every week and you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. And if you feel like it, we would really, really appreciate a 5-star rating on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Chuck us a like on the YouTube stream as well. Because you know what, guys? We're doing this because of our community that we're hopefully building here. And Jeremy and I are having a lot of fun with this. And we hope you guys are having as much fun as we are.
Amen, sister. On that note, happy Tuesday, everyone. And we'll see you next week.